Buster Murdaugh finally sat down for an exclusive interview. And in this interview, he talks about his father, his late mother, and late brother, and he finally shares what he thinks happened that tragic night, and we're going to talk about it in today's video. Hello, Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the sofa. The pretend sofa's back there. Mr. Roscoe is holding it down, though he has blended into his sofa on top of the sofa. We've got double sofa energy today. Okay. And my name is Paul. Now, you saw the thumbnail. You heard my little intro. You know why we're here. Okay. And that is what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about Buster Murdaugh. Now, the way this video will work is we're going to do a very quick overview of the case and how we arrived at this video. This is not meant to go into a deep dive about what the case is about, though, right? We're mostly focused on Buster's part of this interview. Now, what he did is he sat down with Fox Nation and did an exclusive interview, if you will. It was a 3-part docuseries. And so what I've done for this video is I've gone through and literally just taken extracts of the parts where he's talking, because those are the things I want to speak to, and I've taken out of those the ones that I want to speak about the most, that I feel are the most relevant. So the way this will work is we'll do our little overview, and then we'll begin looking at the clips and talking about them and use those as conversation starters. Now, as always, please remember, I ain't no psychotherapist, I ain't no cop, I ain't no lawyer. I'm none of that fancy credentialed stuff, okay? I'm just a guy with a pretend sofa, a real dog, and some opinions on true crime. So be sure to look over the stuff that we talk about yourself and come to your own conclusions, and, well, talk about them in the comment section. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the overview of this case. So the Murdaugh family was literally a legal dynasty in the low country of South Carolina. Now, all of a sudden we started, and we, the public, started seeing headlines coming out of there about all this, death and murder and financial crimes and this, that, and the other. Well, what was going on behind the scenes is this legal dynasty was crumbling at the hands of Alec Murdaugh, who is now in jail serving life sentences for taking the life of his son Paul and his wife Maggie. Now, at the center of this also were other crimes, accidents, that type thing. And what kicked this whole case off is his son Paul was in a boat accident, essentially caused a boat accident by driving drunk and killed one of his friends, which then began an investigation into some financial stuff and whatnot for a civil lawsuit. And this would unearth, I'm talking extreme financial crimes at the hands of Alec Murdaugh. Well, then during all of this, Paul and Maggie, his mother, Alec's late wife, end up getting murdered on one of their properties. Well, then, I forget how much longer later, maybe 2 weeks later, whatever, there's an attempted, I don't even know if you would call an assassination, but essentially Alec orchestrated a pretend assassination on his own life and a plot to take his own life and leave his money to his surviving son, Buster. And on that note, again, that's the dime store version of this case. There's entire podcasts dedicated to it, okay? We can't be doing all that in this one video. Although I have made a playlist on it if you want to watch it. So, Buster Murdaugh is the surviving son to Alec Murdaugh. He has lost his mother, he's lost his brother, and now technically his father, because he is going to be locked away for the rest of his life. So we have been waiting on pins and needles to hear really what Buster had to say. And so they started dropping hints at this. He sat down for an interview, he sat down for an interview, he sat down for an interview. Well, I was running over to sign up for this, right? And so I actually watched it several times, and I'm going to say this, as we go through this, I'm going to be talking about what I think about some of his body language. And again, just like I said, I'm not a body language expert, so this is just, my commentary on it. I don't have any kind of, credentials to give a certified opinion on it, right? It's just us talking here, okay? Because I did notice some things, and one of the many times that I watched it and during, the editing process of cutting the clips and all that kind of stuff that I wanted to look at and reviewing them. So I want to go back through, review those, and kind of talk about that and look at, some of his body language, lack of body language, and some of the stuff that he's saying. Now, again, I went back and forth with this overall, and we'll talk more in depth about this at the end of the video, because watching this and finally hear him talk, I was like, oh, okay, well, glad to hear this. And, oh, well, maybe I thought this before, but now I don't think that now. And now I have questions about this over here. I still left this docuseries with plenty of questions, and not just about Buster, but about several things with the case, really. Now, I'm not going to speak to the other parts of it. Well, we will talk about one thing. Alec did some recordings over the phone of his diary three that he did in court, and we're going to review those as well. Overall, I will tell you, this is very surface level. Like, for me, I was like, there ain't nothing new here, other than hearing Buster finally speak, right? But the rest of it, I was like, this is, you know, this is very surface level, that type thing. But if you're interested in this case, of course, you want to watch it. So, that being said, let's go ahead and start watching that first clip.
I never was in that position because we were, you know, raised to where we didn't really I didn't get into a lot of trouble. So, I mean, that wasn't really a thing for me. But there's been an awful lot of things written about an awful lot of my family members. It is completely inflamed in the media. There's no escape from any of it.
Okay, now I wanted to start off with this clip, and this is in reference to, you saw the little headlines there about corruption and, you know, the family and, you know, the good old boy system, that type of stuff. A couple of things here. So first of all, this sets the tone for the way Buster views the media and whatnot. Secondly, you heard him say about like, oh, we weren't raised like we weren't in trouble, and he says, I wasn't. Okay, so one thing that we learned, or at least for me during this, and again, I don't even know this family before this, is watching this, it did seem like Paul was more of kind of like the wild child, if you will, and kind of going out, more of like a roughhouse kind of boy. And so reading between the lines on some things and hearing Buster kind of catch himself like, well, I wasn't, you know, I was like, huh, okay. Now, does this mean anything? No, it was just an interesting little tidbit, right? So let's go ahead on to the next clip.
One of the main reasons I wanted to do this is because there's been an awful lot of, you know, negative publicity talking about, you know, my family and also about myself. And I just want to be able to give a truer perspective and let people understand that some of the things that are out there might not be exactly the truth.
Okay, so here we have his motivation for doing this, right? So he wants to set the record straight, that type thing. Now, one thing I want to go ahead and say and be looking through the lens of it, I want your opinion on this. He seems right off the bat way more poised, way more put together than his own father. Now, mind you, we met Alec Murdaugh at inarguably the like worst time of his life, right? So, I mean, come on. There's that, I'll give him that. But Buster just seems more, I don't know, well-spoken, that type thing. And on that note, it almost seems like he's had some, like, maybe media training, that type thing. He just seems very, like, in control of everything. His tone of voice, his facial, stuff, his movements, that type thing. Now, this could just be how he is, right? I don't know. I don't know the guy. And I'm not even saying that for any other reason than it's just, again, point taken, because remember, he's gone through this whole thing. Whether whether you think he had something to do with the dude, with Stephen Smith, or this, that, or the other, at the end of the day, he lost his mother, he lost his brother, and technically his father, and he went through this whole ordeal, right? It would only behoove him to get into the public light and speak out and say whatever he has to say, but to be as put together as possible. Non-emotional. I'm getting facts across. Boom, 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 boom. That type of thing. So just keep that in mind as we watch these clips on some of the things he talks about. And there will be some where I do feel like he slips a little and maybe lets some emotion out. And we see maybe more of the hurt that he has experienced. But we'll get to that. So let's go on and roll the tape.
My mom and dad met in college. So my dad played football at USC. He had gotten injured, so he was no longer on the team. And he had asked her to go to the football game with him. And he called her that day, said, hey, I'll come pick you up. She said, no, I'm not feeling good or something like that. And then he goes to the game and he sees her about 4 rows down with another guy. So I don't know what transpired after that, but somehow from there they've been together and happy.
Now, I thought that this was just like a nice little touch to put in there, a little story time behind that. Now, I'm also thinking, imagine if you were going to college and a dude asks you out and you don't know who he is, right? And then it turns out that it's the most prominent family of the area, and you're like, what? Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So it kind of made me wonder if that's what happened. I'm like, did she not know it was him? Was she like, what happened here? Or maybe she just at first was like, look, dude, you gotta work a little harder than just offering your last name up here. You know what I'm saying? She could have known who he was, and that was the reason why she didn't want to go out with him at first, and then he woed her over. I don't know. But I just thought it was interesting. I thought it was also interesting to paint this picture, because one thing that I did think about here watching this was, and to keep in mind as we go through this, is there is a time where, Buster Buster and Paul, they were children, obviously, at one point, but small kids. And the way you view your parents when you're that age, now, especially for them, because they grew up in this extreme privilege, extreme wealth, power, this type of stuff. But to them, that was like normal, right? Like they didn't know any different than that. So hearing Buster talk about these stories is helping me to try and pinpoint and connect the dots on how he's steadfastly like, I think my father is innocent. That type thing is what I'm getting at. So let's continue.
Gloria to us was a maid doesn't really encapsulate it because she was hired when we were very young, took us places if mom and dad were out of town. Really, she helped raise Paul and I from when we were little kids. She was a big player inside of our family.
Now, of course, Gloria is the woman who, as we heard here, he described her more than a maid, part of the family, who died at the house when we really don't know what happened, but she took a spill somehow. And this is one of the cases that Alec would rip her children off with the settlement that came through. So again, I wanted to just put this in here because there's all these questions about Gloria and what exactly happened, because we don't really know at this point, because now Alec says that he lied about the dogs tripping her. So, there's that. But to hear him, meaning Buster, speak of, she was, a big player in our family. She was always there. She was, the person who was doing stuff when mom and dad were gone. This was an integral part of the family, which makes the sting of what Alec did to her children that much worse, in my opinion.
So what was the family dynamic in terms of you and your mom, Paul and your dad? Who do you think was closer or more alike?
Growing up, my parents held a very firm line that they were not going to pick favorites.
Did you get hurt?
A little bit. There were times when, I considered myself closer to my mom. Everything that I ever needed, she was there for me. She, advised me. She loved me. I can't put enough emphasis on how important she was to me. And I think that my brother probably was a little bit closer to my dad.
Now, the one thing that I thought was interesting about this, and again, this is more like just a superficial type observation, is Buster looks so much like his father and Paul looks so much like his mother. And so to hear where it's like kind of the reversals of, well, I was more close to mom and he was more close to dad. Him and dad were more like buddies. And I don't know if I put that clip in here, but he does describe how they were more like friends and whatnot. Now, one dynamic that I think went on in the family is that Buster was probably going to be more like the groomed person of, you're going to follow dad's footsteps, or that's what they were hoping for and whatnot. And Paul was able to probably live a little bit more carefree and kind of do what he wanted to do and, cut up. And, he sounds more like an outdoors guy, which Buster will speak of. But I thought that dynamic was interesting. And also interesting in that we see who is still alive.
Paul connected with the Moselle property, managing the property, planting the food plots, planting the dove fields.
And that's what I'm speaking of is, he was the outdoors guy. He liked this property. And we learned this through the trial that was kind of his thing. He enjoyed doing that. And the Snapchats that we saw in the videos taken hours before his murder, he's out riding the property with his dad and doing all that, which goes, for me at least, when you look at the two avenues of this case, because essentially there's still two arguments of people who think Alec is guilty, people who think that he's not, right? And so when you look at it like, well, how could this guy take the life of his son? He was just riding around. It sounded so normal. It sounded so this. And we'll get more into my thoughts and opinions on how I think this went down and why I think it went down and to his guilt or not and whatnot. So just know that, keep that in the back burner going, but let's go on to the next clip.
Just want to ask you a little bit about the Gloria Satterfield situation. Who was in the house when her accident happened?
I don't know who was in the house. I know that my mom and brother were there together, and to think that it was somebody who was so close to us is heartbreaking.
Now, I wanted to take this clip and use this opportunity to speak on this that I found throughout watching this. So when we hear her ask the question of that, and Buster kind of gives this answer of, well, mom and Paul were there. And again, they'll get into like why'd your dad lie and that type thing. And then he's like, think of it somebody so close to us, and you can tell the way they edited it. There's not everything being, put out there. A lot of his answers are very skim the surface, superficial like this, right? Where he doesn't go too deep into into it and like really dig into some of the answers that I would want to hear, you know, and nor do they really ask some of them. Now, I have no doubt that when they did this interview, he probably had an attorney that was like, or one of his family members, you can ask this, you can't ask this, you can ask this, you can't ask this, but I'm sure this was very, not scripted, but you know what I'm saying. I would do the same thing, right? Because you got to remember this with something like this. His dad is probably going to appeal this stuff. His dad currently has tons of court cases going on, right? Financial stuff, that type thing. So this is still what I consider an active case, right? So there's no way, unless Buster just was completely over his dad, that he would get out here and be like, well, yeah, he is a liar. I don't know why. I think he did. I think he's the one who took, you know, her life, Gloria's life. You know what I mean? Like, he's just not going to do that. But because of those dynamics, I think that's why we see a lot of these answers that are just like, really? Like, can we dig a little deeper maybe?
Tell me about where you were living. What were you doing in the weeks leading up to June 7th, 2021?
June 7th, I was up in Charlotte. I was about to start this new job. I was running around. I was supposed to hold this hiring event for one of the restaurants right outside of Charlotte. Got conversated on the phone with my family that day, you know, both my dad and my mom, and maybe even my brother. I would just describe it as normal.
Now, I found this part interesting to kind of hear what he was doing. You know, he's over in Charlotte. He's not in town. And I talked to, you know, the family on the phone, This normalcy he speaks of, and like everything was going fine, contributes to my thoughts, which again we'll talk about here in a little bit, on the desperation that was building up that day from Alec, the desperation that came up. And it always makes me wonder, was Buster spared because he simply wasn't there, or because someone had to carry the name, someone had to carry the legacy? Hopefully, you know what I'm saying? Would things have been different had Buster been on the property there with him that day? You know, we'll never know.
So, was it hard for you to watch your Aunt Marion up there?
Yes, it was.
Why?
Well, for one, because I know that she was absolutely terrified. I know that she did not want to be up there. I love my Aunt Marion no matter what, you know, ever happens.
Now, you saw him hugging her in the little clip there. And if you watch the trial, then you know he's 100% right. She didn't want to be up there. This was very traumatic for her. I mean, for God's sakes, her sister was brutally murdered, and her nephew, right? And to be up there looking at Alec, your brother-in-law, former, whatever you want to call him at this point, and to hear her piece her story together during the trial, where she's coming to this realization of, what else can you say? Like, the evidence is pointing to this guy right in front of me, but also where she carries the weight of, she was suggesting to her sister to go meet Alec there on the property, and the guilt that she carried, which I feel so bad for. You want to take that burden off of her, because one never knows that this is going to happen, right? And it was the right thing to do for her to go there, to be there for Alec under the pretense of what he was saying. Obviously, we know differently now, and of course, hindsight is always 20/20, but my heart ached for her, seeing her on the stand and having so much issues with that, and I'm sure that haunts her, and I really hope that she's able to make her way through that. But I also thought it was nice to hear Buster say he loves his aunt no matter what, you know, like, look, that's my aunt, I love her, because that's how that should be. And even if he might disagree, like, if she's thinking, yeah, I mean, he totally, you know, Alec, you know, killed my sister, I hope that no more relationships and things are destroyed by his actions, meaning the actions that, you know, Alec took that evening.
Tell me about the phone call.
The phone call was, there was a tone that I was not familiar with coming out of his voice. He requested or asked if I was sitting down, and then he told me that he had returned to Moselle and that he, you know, rode down to the kennels and that he had found my mom and brother shot and killed.
Where are you now?
My whole body went into a sense of shock. I can remember basically sitting on the foot of the bed. I had lost all feeling in my arms. Obviously, your first question is, you know, like, I mean, what happened? And then you just, I don't know, my body almost kind of quit working, but finally kind of got some composure together. You know, my girlfriend Brooklyn had packed my bag up for me. We got in the car and we started driving down.
I absolutely cannot imagine what that phone call had to have been like. Getting a phone call from your father that he just showed up to your house, whatever, and your mother and brother are dead. I mean, can you imagine? And the reaction that he describes seems very real. Your body goes numb. You're shock, right? I mean, complete shock. And so to me, hearing him describe those feelings, that was something that I hadn't, heard him speak of before. And I'm just like, oh my God, it was like another maybe making him more human, if that makes sense. Relatable, that type thing of like, oh my God, I can only imagine. Like, and then that drive that they had to make home to be like, what are we getting into? Like, what are we walking into? Not knowing at all what was about to unfold.
I was upset. I was angry. I was disappointed. I mean, it's very, very, very difficult to try to wrap my head around all these circumstances.
Now he's speaking on like the unraveling of these lies, of the situations that would come to be and whatnot. And this is what I'm talking about. These are very political answers. These are very rehearsed, in my opinion. I'm being very mindful of what I'm saying. And again, I get it. I'm not faulting him for that, simply because all the legal issues they have going on right now, I mean, he comes from a legal family, right? They're not going to say anything worse than like his father admitted to on the stand, you know what I mean? And so to sit here and get in any kind of accusatory manner, anything like that could mess up an appeal or this, that, or the other, or even his relationship with his father, because one dynamic of this that I sit here and think is, I'm like, his dad's all he has left, right? What do? You have to make this decision of, do I think whoever, in this case his dad, did this? And if I do, then, well, how does that change the relationship? Where do you go from here? My dad saying he didn't do it. All these different dynamics, very similar to Michael Peterson, the staircase guy, and the different dynamics of his family members when all that went down as to who thought he took Kathleen's life, so on and so forth. Now, remember earlier where I spoke of Alec did these recordings of some of his diary entries and whatnot? Let's take a minute and listen to a few of those, and then we'll talk about those.
This is Wednesday, January 25th at 10:45 a.m. The real trial starts today. Buster is coming. Cannot wait to see me in Brooklyn, John Marvin, Busy, and everyone else. They told me no physical contact was looking forward to hugging them. It's 10 minutes before we start. I am ready. Croft flat lied. Jim is crossing Croft tomorrow. He has the whole night to plan. I want to see him get aggressive with him, although that's not really his style. It is hard to watch someone else cross-examine a witness when you can't do it. I trust him completely. They told me that they're showing crime scene photos and body cam videos. I haven't seen any photos or footage of Maggie or Papa. I don't need to. I remember so vividly. I am more certain than ever that Maggie and Paul are going to get lost in all of this. What a long day. No man should have to see what I found, much less have to relive it a second time. Can't get the images out of my head. I'm sure the hardest part is yet to come. I'm so ready for this to be over, but obviously I'm very nervous. It's always hard waiting on a jury. I'm sure it will be twice as hard from a cell. I do not want anyone speaking on my behalf this morning. Number one, it would be too hard on them. Number two, it would be an absolute and complete waste of time, as I know the judge has his mind made up.
Now, when I was listening to these, really my opinion of them is I was like, this just is kind of like generic, almost like they were written in the context of wanting somebody else to hear them. You know what I mean? The way that they were done. Now, again, who knows if he did that or not, right? It's just my opinion. But there's really nothing here that was like, wow, like these are all kind of generic feelings that I would expect to hear from someone on this. Like the whole thing of, I trust him completely. I mean, okay, now the stuff about seeing Buster and wanting to hug them and see them and all that, nothing about missing Paul or Maggie, nothing about in depth of that. Now, granted, these are just little excerpts, right? So they could have not put that in there. We don't know, right? No anguish. And that was one thing that I felt was lacking during all of this, was that connection, that human connection again, and not being able to make it, especially with Alec, of things just feeling very showmanship, if you will, all the way down to these, things here. So anyways, that was that. That was all we're going to review of those. Let's go on to the next thing.
When you listen to the prosecution, they built the argument that killing Paul and Maggie would buy him even more time. It would turn sympathy on him at a moment when a lot was about to come down. What do you think about that?
I was thinking that I don't know what or how bad everything was going to get or how bad everything had gotten for him. But I do know that I do not think that his justification and his out of whatever storm he concocted was to kill my mother and brother.
Okay, so now we're getting into some of the real in-depth stuff, and we'll start using this to talk about the actual, guilt, not guilt, that type thing. So here's the thing. With what he's saying I agree and disagree with him on this, right? Now, again, I don't know them. I don't know their family, right? So he's going to know better. However, his dad kept a massive secret life from everyone, right? And I think everyone got a different version of Alec. So when he's saying, I don't think that, and again, he had no idea how bad it was about to get, that the answer to everything was, well, I'll take Maggie and Paul's life. I don't think Alec was pre-plotting that either, right? I don't think it went that deep. I think this level of desperation escalated that day into a boiling point, right? I think it was not a last minute decision, but like okay, and maybe something could have even triggered it in that evening. But I don't think that it was as pre-plotted for weeks on end. I was planning this. I don't think that at all. I think there was an act of desperation that did have some planning to it, because he obviously did some stuff with cleanup and that type thing to cover his tracks, right? So it wasn't just a spur of the moment thing, but I also don't think it was a built into the plan with lots of premeditation to it. I think it was just a little bit of premeditation and a desperate moment, because again, when you look at the timeline of the world closing in with the financial stuff, right? And all of that going that day even, and then him going home and, oh, miraculously now, someone has come by and killed Maggie and Paul, right? How convenient type thing. And again, for me, I'm just like, if you've been around desperation like that, if you've seen that where someone has not ever had to answer to someone else and now they're having to, and this is a big having to answer. This is a massive family name, tons of money on the line, you name it. I mean, he was doing major bad stuff and he was getting caught and he knew it. And so that is the desperation that I think pushed him to do the desperate, tragic acts that he did.
You say you think the police didn't do the job?
There's an awful lot of pressure on a law enforcement entity to come up with a suspect.
You said that you thought they rushed to judgment because the person who found the bodies was the easiest person to charge. Why would they want to do that to your dad?
I think it's one of those things where you have to do something. And I think that that's the option and the route that they decided to go with. My biggest thing that I want people to realize that there are always two sides of the story. Now they can pick which one they want to believe, but I think there's a heck of a lot that still needs to be answered about what happened on June the 7th.
Now, I will agree with Buster here. We see this time and time again in cases where there's a very quick oh, okay, this person did it. That's the story we're going with. It makes sense. Let's go. And then after the fact, it's, oh, well, wait a second, hold up. There's usually glaring evidence in those type cases that along the way you're like, well, wait a minute. Everything kept coming back to Alec in this motive, the moments. Him lying, and remember one of the jurors even said that once the whole Snapchat kennel video came out where he was there moments before they were killed and he lied about it. I mean, she was like, it sealed the deal. I mean, what do you say to that, right? I mean, that's the thing. This evidence as was presented was very hard to get out of that. Now, again, on this note, there's also a lot of stuff with the case that made the cookie crumbled in such a way that there was a lot of questionable things. It was like, well, hold on, well, did he do this? And well, how did he do that? And how did he go here so quick? Things like that. So, but at the end of the day, the lying, all of that type stuff, I mean, he painted himself into a corner. Now, of course, just like Buster says, and I agree with him, lots of people have questions. For me, it's almost like, I want to know exactly how it went down. I want to know, what were they talking about beforehand? Because for me personally, what I think everything was going normal. I, at one point, thought that they had gotten into an argument, and maybe they could have, but I don't think that. I think that everything was going somewhat normal, and there was split decision at some point that day. I think at some point that day, Alec decided to do this. Whether it was coming home, whatever, but I think it went down that day in his mind of this is what's going to happen. And he might not have even known like exactly when it was going to happen, but when he started getting everyone over there, I think that those decisions were made at that point.
I didn't say anything to my father. I walked inside and I saw him, and it was utter silence. It was a big embrace. He immediately broke down crying. I started crying, and that was what that was. I mean, it's difficult to relive these tough circumstances.
Okay, now this part here, this is one of the moments that I spoke of earlier where I think we see a glimpse into the hurt for Buster, because it looks to me like he's getting that lump in his throat, and he does this number here where he's like, almost like if you're trying to avoid your face doing the thing that it does when you get ready to cry or you get emotional and you start getting that sense, like, you know what I mean? Like that type thing. I got that from him here, you know, and he's like reliving this. He's looking around. He's reliving this moment of walking in to the house, you know, and he said earlier in the clip, which I didn't put up here, you know, I didn't go down there. They told me not to go to the kennels, which thank God, right? I mean, we don't want him seeing his mother and brother in that state, right? And this embrace, and you're just like, what happened, right? I mean, like, what? And again, at this point, he's going to have no reason to think that, you know, a dad killed mom and, you know, Paul, right? I mean, who would at that point? None of these secrets have been coming out up until now. And again, many people say, like we saw in court, where for Alec, this kind of worked because they were like, you know, we quit questioning him about the money because his wife and son were just murdered. Like that was the last thing on our mind, and it bought him some more time. So there's that. Let's keep going.
There was a lot of discussion about the guns being everywhere. A lot of people across the country watch that, and they think that's unusual.
Yeah, no, well, I can understand how someone can perceive it as unusual.
All right, let's go shoot this one.
We obviously grew up with a love for the outdoors, love for hunting. And I think everybody's seen the video of the gun room with the big gun cabinet where everything is.
And they're loaded and ready to go.
Normally, unloaded would always be the key. You know, our father from a very early age taught us gun safety and to not really just be leaving a bunch of loaded weapons around. But sure, absolutely, there are times when, you know, you forget about it and they stay loaded and you forget to unload them.
Now, this part here I thought was interesting, just talking about guns and whatnot. And at the very end, he's like, well, there's some times where, you know, you forget to unload them and yeah, there's guns around or whatever. Now, this is like a hunting lodge, right? Of course there's going to be guns there. That doesn't even make anything feel weird to me. Them leaving the guns loaded, probably not the greatest thing to do, whatever, but it is what it is. But remember, that came down. There's so many questions about the firearms in this case, right? And all of that, and then the questionable of like, well, what's your gun safety practices and that type of thing? You know, but one thing that I thought that was, you know, interesting here is this is a sticky question, I feel like, for him, because he's kind of having to admit, well, yeah, we might have been doing that. There's a little bit of a carelessness that I also feel like, and one of the clips where he talks about the missing gun and whatnot, and how, you know, Buster, or we'll hear it, but how he navigates through this, again, very political, very, you know, type thing. My interpretation of it was they had this huge piece of property, this house, they grew up around guns, they were comfortable around them, they were going to do what they wanted to do, right? Like, yeah, we might leave it undone, and they're also kids, right? You know, at least Paul and Buster. And so that's just how it was, you know, and that's just how they were, right, wrong, or indifferent.
There was a lot of discussion, obviously, about the 300 blackout rifles.
We both got one for Christmas in 2016, I believe. So Paul's got lost. They went to a party. It was left in a pickup truck. And then when they left the party, the gun was gone and, you know, was never seen again.
And he got another one.
Apparently. So I wasn't really aware of that either. But after everything that's been said and heard, then yeah, it certainly seems like there was another one purchased.
Now, this also is just kind of going into, you know, Paul, the whole thing of, you know, Buster seems a little bit more like you're going to be the one to follow suit. Paul is a little bit more of the wild child, that type thing. Oh, he had this gun and it got stolen out of a truck. And, you know, he seemed to always be kind of getting into these little situations like this. But then to hear Buster be like, well, that's news to me. I guess they got another one. Apparently, you know, that was the case. I thought that was an interesting little detail because remember, during the trial, this was such a big part of it, of the missing gun and, you know, what would have happened and how did that go down? down if this is what was used, and the whole 9 yards, right? It was just such a huge thing with the guns. And again, some of these questions, I almost want to hear him answer these same questions in 10 years, to hear what he has to say, where his father's cases rested at, all the cases, right? If we would get different answers, or if he would have a different perspective on some of this.
If you believe your dad's innocent, your mom and your brother's killer is out there somewhere.
That's what I believe.
Would he get someone else to do it?
No, ma'am. I don't think that he could be affiliated with endangering my mother and brother. I mean, we've been here for a while now, and that's been my stance.
So, are you fearful for your life if you believe the killer is still out there?
Absolutely. I think that I've set myself up to be safe, but yes, when I go to bed at night, I have a fear that there is somebody else still out there.
Oh, okay, that was a big one. First of all, so he still thinks there's somebody else out there. Secondly, the part where, he was like, what she said, would he get somebody else to do it? No. Dad wouldn't basically put anyone in danger with that. Well, immediately I'm thinking, your dad allegedly was highly involved and drug usage, purchase. It was comfortable enough with the dude to get him to come shoot him on the side of the road, right? I don't know if your dad would be that concerned about that kind of safety, right? Because there's other things he was doing. Ripping everyone off in town, right? The threatening, with the idea hanging over his head, I could go to prison, but maybe he never thought about that because he was too, above the law. But all of his actions show a very different type person that is not concerned with how his actions will affect his family. So I kind of disagree with Buster on that. But I also understand that, number one, don't know him, not in the situation. Number two, that's his. You're going to have a certain viewpoint on your own parent, and this is still very fresh, right? So you're going to have a certain viewpoint of, that's just your dad in this particular situation. There was no tumultuous stuff growing up, it sounds like, to make him think, yeah, dad's an evil person, or, you know what I mean? It just doesn't sound like that was there. Questionable stuff, yes. But, capable of this, no. And so for Buster, I get it. It's like, that's his dad. He's going to look at him in a certain light and probably processing all this behind the scenes and also trying to fan down the fire, right? He doesn't want to breathe any more air into it because, my God, look at how big it has become already.
Your dad had told you that he didn't go down to the kennel that night.
That's right. He told everybody that.
So when you discovered that he had lied about that, what'd you think?
I thought it was very odd. I was confused. I didn't know why you would lie about such a thing.
Why do you think he did?
I don't know. I'd still like to understand, why that was, needed to be lied about.
Now, if this answer is true, because again, don't we all want to know that? This is one of those that I'm like, really? That's the answer we're going to get? We've been waiting this whole time, but I'm thankful that he got out there and did this. A very political answer. I don't know. I'm waiting to find that out too. You hear some of these jailhouse calls that come through with him and his dad on the phone. It's very cool, and I almost get the vibe from Buster a lot of times that I'm like, it just sounds like he's over this. Like, not like he's like, oh, screw you, dad, but almost like this is just, because his dad calls with some weird stuff, right? And it's just like, okay, yep, dad, great. Okay, well, we're doing this. And, okay, well, what do you want me to do? And, kind of still picking up the pieces and helping his dad along with this. It has to be incredibly stressful, right? But like this right here, it's like, yeah, we all want to know. Like, why would you lie about that? Why would you lie about that? It's part of the reason why is the reason he had to get in the stand. And it's a huge reason why he was convicted.
Your mom and Paul were very concerned about your dad's drug use. Did Paul mention that to you?
Yeah, so there were times where they mentioned it to me. It would be a little bit of a scenario of maybe they discovered like pills or found pills, but never in my wildest imagination could I think like, oh man, this guy's battling a 20-year opiate addiction where he's taking, however many pills a day.
Now, I thought that this was interesting because you get this sense of, Paul and his mother talking about the pill problem and, oh, maybe they, found some pills and this and that. I think also that could be at the center of what went down on that day. Maybe something took place and maybe those conversations were going and it facilitated this, they're driving me crazy or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Also, the whole thing of what really happened to Gloria, did she find something? Was she getting ready to confront, someone, something, whatever? Because when evidence was coming out and people discussing like finding these pretty big bags of pills, I don't dispute that his dad clearly had a drug problem with these. I question if it was as severe as Alec made it out to be. Something seems very, very off. Something seems very off with the amount of usage that he said he was doing and for how long, and that this is why I stole all this money, right? It almost seems like better to take the L on that than for this over here, kind of a thing. But whatever that is over there could be, I don't know. And again, this is just me, going off on a limb here. So let's get back on track.
It seemed like the better thing to do.
How did that make you feel?
It made me feel horrible. And what made me feel even worse was what he was actually trying to do. And to understand that he thought that that was going to be some kind of benefit, given all the things that I had gone through prior, disappointed me. And, I told him, he was like, you should know that this is not the way to handle it. This is not what I needed. I needed you here, not, attempting some kind of suicide stunt.
And this is one thing where I'm sitting here listening to Buster. He's so poised about discussing this, right? Like, he boom, 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 and here's this, and I needed you here and that. In comparison with his father's erratic, desperate demeanor that we saw at times in the stand and conversation and all that, Buster seems so much more, almost like Buster is the parent in this situation now, right? Clearly became that. And clearly is now, is what I mean by that. So I thought it was interesting that Buster articulated things so well during this. There's almost a sense of like talking about yourself in third person, but he's not doing that, right? But almost like that detachment about his feelings to be able to stand by here. It was horrible. It felt this way, but being very about it, and that kind of thing. He might just be that kind of guy, right? That's a lot of this, I imagine, is what's going on. He's just that type dude of, you don't show that type of stuff, so this is probably very uncomfortable, like as it is for a lot of men to talk about feelings and things of that nature, so I give him that.
So as you're listening to them talk about these timelines and break it all down, did you second guess your belief that it was somebody from the outside?
I still stand with my opinion, and I just think it still was somebody from the outside.
And there's no evidence as to who these people might be?
Not as that have been found yet.
I totally did not get a confident feeling off of his answer with this. And notice the when she said, as they're going through this timeline, he said, I still stand by. Because I interpreted it to be like, well, during the trial when this was coming out, I expected a past tense answer and not like, well, I used to think, but he kind of looks doubtful, like, and he looks away. Well, I still stand by. And that's one of the things where I'm like, even if he was questioning this, because you would have to, right? You would have to sit there and at one point say, I have these two things here. If Dad, let's go down the road that Dad did it. Okay, well, A, B, C. Let's go down the road if he didn't do it. You would have to question that as just a possibility, right? Because it's all out there. Like, you have to go down like this, the timeline, the questions, this, that, and the other. But for him he just almost seems to withdraw a little bit in the way that he says, I still stand by this. And was there evidence? Well, not as of yet. And I don't think there ever will be.
Did you cry?
I don't like to do that thing in the front of a camera. I don't think anybody would. But yeah, you are going through a tremendous emotional time. It's an absolutely excruciatingly difficult experience.
Now, when she's asking him, did you cry? And he says, I don't like to do that thing in front of a camera. This is what I'm talking about, where he, first of all, describes that crying, whatever feelings, and that thing in front of a camera. Like, I just think he's very uncomfortable with feelings in general. Not even getting into the questions that are being asked of, do you think your dad wiped out your family, right? Can you imagine having to answer that? It would be very uncomfortable, especially, we haven't gone through appeals and all this kind of stuff yet. So I give him that. I completely get that.
They didn't find a murder weapon. They didn't find any bloody clothing. There were no witnesses. A lot of digital evidence.
Yeah, crappy motive.
You think it was a crappy motive? And yet, 12 jurors all agreed that your dad killed your mom and Paul.
That's right.
What do you think about that?
I do not believe it was fair.
Why?
I was there for 6 weeks studying it, and I think it was a tilted table from the beginning. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the jurors felt that way prior to when they had to deliberate. It was predetermined in their minds prior to when they ever heard any shred of evidence that was given in that room.
Why would the jurors be inclined to go against your dad?
because of everything they had the ability to read prior to the trial. I think that people get overwhelmed, and I think that they believe everything that they read, and I think it took advantage of a jury pool in a very small town, in a very small county.
Now, one thing with this is notice when he's like, a crappy motive. Like, he still has some anger about this. Like, you can tell it's like right under there. Now, again, I will say the things that she brought up in the beginning, like no bloody clothes, no witnesses, no this. I mean, this is the questions that I want answered, right? Because even though I stand by where I'm like, yeah, I think Alex did it, I don't think the motive is crappy because I completely think that that's what went on. I think he got desperate, and I think in a moment of desperation, he took their lives. And then a few weeks later, in another moment of desperation, he had somebody attempt to take his own life, right? It's a pattern. And so, but I too question, how did he pull those things off? When you get into, was there someone else involved? Was there this? Was there that? And, I too have those questions, and hopefully we'll get answer to those one day.
For the sentencing, Judge Newman spoke, and he said, I'm sure Maggie and Paul visit you every night when you're trying to go to sleep. And your dad said every day and every night. Did you think the judge was going too far?
Yeah, I think that's just another one of his clever little lines to suggest that he agrees with the guilty verdict. I think he was very straightforward about that, and I think it was just a kind of a cruel analogy to be throwing out amongst just an overly public trial.
Now, I'll give Buster this. I think the judge agrees with it too, right? I think the judge probably thought he was guilty as well. He saw all the evidence just like the other jurors did. I think to write it off as, the jury was tainted and the judge is tainted, I don't think that's really fair, but also it's not my dad, right? I get it. You're going to be upset. Your dad was just convicted of taking the life of your mother and brother, and you don't believe that he did it. So of course you're going to have feelings about that, right? Totally understandable. But yeah, I mean, I think that the judge, I do too. I think the judge thought he did it. The speech that he gave or his words to him were just that. Like, I'm sure they do visit you every night. Like, there's a level of that guilt, and I think that too. I think they probably haunt him. How could they not? How would you lay your head down at nighttime and not have those haunting images in there?
I think it was somebody that wanted to hurt my brother, and it was carried out. At least that's where my mind was then, and it still is.
Interesting, it says at least that's where my mind was then, and it still is. When I first heard this go down, I 100% thought that's what it was too, right? And that's why it looks so perfect, that it could be that. But then as we learn more evidence, it just started becoming this whole other thing where I was like, I'm not thinking someone was out after Paul anymore, right? And again, if that was the case, why would Alec be, left alive? Although it would be to make him look like he did it. So I kind of answered my question with that. But anyways, let's go on to the next clip.
His sister said someone approached her and said that you and Stephen were romantically involved. His brother says that someone approached him and says that you were with a group of young men who beat him with a baseball bat. What do you say to that? To both of those?
Absolutely baseless rumors. I unequivocally deny anything that you just read off of that piece of paper. I did not have any personal, intimate relations with Stephen, and that obviously cannot be proven because it is baseless. I never had anything to do with his murder, and I never had anything to do with him on a physical level of any regard.
Where were you the night that Stephen Smith was killed?
The night Stephen was killed, I was at our Edisto Beach house.
With your family?
With my mom and my brother.
Given everything you're going through, what did you feel like when you heard that this thing was surfacing again?
Well, it's a lot like this, and I don't want to be rude here, but have you ever been accused of murdering somebody?
No.
Well, let me tell you, this is very, 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 it's a terrible thing to place on somebody with absolutely no fact. I mean, it has harmed my reputation. I mean, people perceive me as a murderer.
Ooh, now this is the big whammy here that we've been waiting for, right? Okay, couple of things. First of all, again, very poised. When she was asking the questions, he was doing this. Like he was waiting, right? Like he was like, don't show any emotion. Don't show anything, even kill. Now, let me say this before we get into it. I have no opinion at this point if I think Buster has something to do with Stephen Smith's murder. Someone took the life of Stephen Smith, okay? Period. Someone killed this boy. Stephen Smith needs justice. wherever that justice leads is what needs to happen. If it's to Buster, so be it. If it's to this other group of guys that they're talking to, which is where my mind is now actually going. This ain't the video for it. Again, I got the playlist, okay. But there's another group of dudes that there's some attention brought to. Now, whether Buster was part of that, I don't know, right? But that's where my mind goes to. I do not think it was a hit and run. I do think Steven encountered someone or a group of people that evening, and there was some type of an ill event, and his body was left there purposely like that. That's what I think happened. But again, there's not been enough evidence other than town rumors that Buster did this or had something to do with it. Having said that, I do think it's interesting that his alibi is that he was with his mother and brother at that house, who they clearly can't say anything, right? But does that mean that I think he did it? No. I would probably err towards I don't think he had anything to do with it. But that's just me. Again, wherever the evidence goes. If something came out tomorrow and said, hands down, we got videotape from a little satellite camera, we saw Buster there a bit. Okay, not surprising. Same thing goes down. Buster wasn't there. Dudes did it with no connection to Buster. Okay, not surprising. That's where I'm at with it. So when Buster's talking about this, and he's like, and again, wasn't it giving like this energy of like Bill Clinton? I did not have relations with Monica Lewinsky. This is that political media trained kind of vibe he gives off, right? Of like, to me, he was very in control of everything, his face, everything during that. On that same note where he's like, have you been accused of murder? I mean, again, if this is major, right? The Buster did it and they said this because of that and whatever. I mean, it's true, right, wrong, or indifferent, whether you like him or not, it's true. So until there's truly factual, bam, we've got him, we can tie him to it. It's just I'm up in the air about it. But that being said, we want to see justice for Steven because someone has gotten away with a brutal murder of this young man, right? Bless his mother's heart, bless his sister, all his friends, people who love this boy. They are fighting for that. And in the documentary, they do say whether it's an open investigation, they're trying to get to it. And I think it will be solved, but I think it's going to take some time, right? I think it'll take some time. And again, wherever justice points towards is where we'll go with it, right? Because it definitely needs to happen. Now, let's continue.
It feels like anybody that maintains the last name Murdaugh now has some, horrible stain on their integrity, because there's obviously a perception, people think like, oh, the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree.
Do you ever worry, am I like Dad?
No, I do not worry because I am not a thief. I am not a liar. I'm not a manipulator. In those regards, I am nothing like him. But in other regards, I believe that I do hold some of his more admirable traits, which I am quite proud of.
Now, I thought this was very interesting here to hear Buster say, I'm not a thief, I'm not a liar, I'm not a manipulator. To hear him admit to those things about his father, I was like, okay, interesting, because I guess my big thing watching this is I wanted to see what thought processes, when he lays his head down at nighttime, what are the things he's thinking about this? You know what I'm saying? And so to hear him say that, at least to admit to it, like, yes, your father is a liar, he stole from everybody, he did these things. Now, but also to hear him hold this other thing in here of, Dad might have done this, but it was also this. And we often see this with children of, especially serial killers, people like this, where they're like, well, Dad was this is my dad, he was this. He was the apple of my eye during this time. I didn't know he was out murdering women every night. And I'm not saying this is what Buster's dad did, but I'm using that as an example. And so when I hear him talk about these admirable traits, because yes, you hear everyone talking, they're like, Alec was an amazing attorney. He could go in there, he was a master at it, right? He obviously had other traits. You can be two things at once. You can be charming, but you can also be Ted Bundy, right? You can be a great lawyer and this and that, but you can also be ripping off the entire town. It kind of is what it is. And so to hear him hold those two thoughts, I just found that interesting. So let's go on.
All right. So let's talk about Buster 2024, 2025, and beyond. Mm-hmm. What are your plans for the future?
My plans for the future are to live a very, very happy life with happy people around me and hopefully get to a place where I can go out and enjoy myself without having to be perceived as a character in this Murdaugh story.
Thank you. Let's step down.
Now, I thought that was very interesting to be surrounded by happy people, to kind of be able to move on and rebuild life, because again, he's almost in like this limbo. He's right. He is a character in this story, right? So I can't imagine. I mean, you see some of the newspaper things, Buster seen out shopping, and it's like, okay, I mean, of course he is. He has to go to the grocery store, you know what I'm saying? And I think that unfortunately for him, because of number one, the name, he talked about this. I mean, this name is kind of smeared at this point. And so he's going to have that going on. Also, that there's a lot of people that think, hands down, especially locally, where people are more in tune with all the nuances of what it's like there locally, that he had something to do with Stephen, and whatnot. And again, time will tell with that. But then in general, I mean, this is like an international case, right? Everybody's watching it. And so everyone's kind of eyes on him. And so that's why I think this went over so huge, is him coming and finally speaking out. Now, here's some of my final thoughts on this. Like I said, overall, I felt like this was very poised, very media trained, very generic political answers given throughout. I do not think that we got a true glimpse into anything other than he does not think his dad did it. If we go based on what he says, somebody else from the outside did this. Dad didn't do it. I get Dad's a bad person in ways A, B, and C, but not over here. And that's his stance. He fears for his safety because he still thinks that somebody else is out there trying to get him. He kind of got slippery with some of the questions, and who knows what was cut out that we never, that hit the cutting room floor we never saw. So this did not dig its heels in and give me any sense of closure. It didn't give me like, oh wow, we really got there with Buster. I think we could hear him speak in 5 to 10 years and it could be completely different than this. He could be like, you know what, actually I have come to the conclusion that maybe Dad did it, but I don't think he would ever say that, even if he thought that. I do think that behind closed doors, Buster questions these things, but he knows he has to keep up a certain front, because imagine the storm fire that this would create if he said that he thought his dad did this. Not just legally, but publicly as well. It would be huge. He probably wants to move on with his life. His mother and brother are dead, according to, the law, at the hands of his father. Whether he agrees with that or not is whatever. The law has swung its gavel and said, your dad did this. He has been convicted. And so he has this new life of having to deal with his father behind bars the rest of his life, while still going on and doing his own life and dealing with all the implications of this. So time will tell. Now, again, I'm sure we'll continue to see him in the tabloids and the papers and whatnot, so long as there's an unsolved case with Stephen, and so long as his father is doing stuff behind bars, he's going to be a topic of conversation. So, that being said, do I think you need to rush out and rent this? If you're interested in this case, absolutely you need to watch it. Because again, I didn't put all the clips in here, right? This is just some of them that you're seeing. And then I didn't put any of the stuff in there about the other people. I mean, there's lots of other stuff they put in there. Was there any groundbreaking information? No. But again, it's a case that interests me. It's not local, but local-ish. And so for that reason, I do find it interesting to keep up with it. And now on that note, if you are watching, thank you. I know this was a long video, so I do appreciate if you're still watching. Roscoe asked that you throw some sofas down in the comment section for him so that he can go and lay on them and do little Roscoe things. And until we meet down in the comment section with Roscoe doing Roscoe things on the sofas that you drop in the comment section, I'll see y'all there.